Hello, hello. Good afternoon. This is Terry Coxum of the Coxum Report. I have my fabulous co-host on today, Mr. Anthony Weeks, who's going to be joining us today. And we're going to be talking to the Chairman of Foreign Affairs, our New York State Congressmember Greg Meeks. And as always, we're going to be bringing you some nuggets and, talking about some barriers, some best practices, but most importantly, big ideas. And we want to talk to the congressman about all the wonderful things that he's doing in foreign affairs. Congressman Greg Meeks, welcome. How
Hi,
are
Terry.
you?
Good to be with you and Anthony. It's good to see both of you.
Good to have you join us today on the Coxum Report. So, Congressman Meeks, you're our chairman of Foreign Affairs. You are a phenomenal congressman here in New York. We've had the pleasure of working together for many years. And so, it's always a pleasure to see you all, and definitely a pleasure to have you on the Coxum Report today. Thank you so much for joining us. Anthony Meeks, Anthony, you hear me, Meeks and Weeks. You see what I'm doing today? You see what I'm dealing with today, but I'm gonna get through it. Anthony is our fabulous producer. And I know we don't have a lot of time because our congressman has a lot that he's doing. And so we want to support and encourage all that he's doing. And everyone is listening today, make sure you go onto the website, see what Congressmember Gregory W. Meeks is doing and our great Congress. And so, Greg, talk to us a little bit about your chairmanship in foreign affairs and how that relates to IPAC.
Well, look, it is a honor to be the chair of the committee, first of all, and to be actually the first African American to ever chair the committee. Is something that I think is important in the sense that when we're talking about in this world of diversity and inclusion, particularly in whether you talk about corporate or government, is extremely important for what we bring forward and the ideas and the thought patterns and the staffs that we hire and how we interconnect and interrelate with other folks on the committee. But as usual, when Barack Obama became the president of the United States, he inherited a mess that came from the former president, his predecessor, and the world has inherited a mess from the former president. And so I've become the chair, and the world is basically on fire. And some of it is new, and some of it was really set in place by the former president. So it keeps me very busy, whether you're talking about my recent trip, for example, to Southeast Asia, where we visited 5 countries. We were in Taiwan and Singapore and Malaysia and South Korea and Japan, or, the several trips that I've had to take to Ukraine and to the EU allies, Poland, and along with a number of other countries that we've visited there several times. Then the recent trip that I've also had to take to South America, given the election of the new president of Colombia, but the number of African Colombians in Colombia, but in Africans from the African diaspora throughout Central and South America, and a trip that I've taken to Africa itself, where we visited 5 countries there. So we've been very busy and looking at going to the Caribbean and working with CARICOM. There's a lot that's going on all across the world. So
and it seems like it's all at once because it's like you said, it's on fire, right? And so they have no greater person in charge, though, than you, I have to say, Chairman, because you have an extensive list of experience in dealing with putting out fires, whether they're here in New York or across the country. So we have extreme confidence that whatever you are doing, and again, I encourage everyone that's listening to make sure they're supporting our congressman, because the only way that we can get him to do what he's doing is to be supportive and to be encouraging along the way. So we know that you're going to do what you're in there to do, plus more. You're going to give not just 100%, but 110%. And so we're encouraged by you being there. And when we talk about the Indian Pacific framework, a lot of people don't really understand what that means. And so just want to kind of get you to kind of give an understanding to our listeners, just a quick Reader's Digest version of what that is and how important it is. And I think that really is important, especially COVID. COVID did a lot in highlighting the supply chain. It did a lot in highlighting the economy and the climate. And so this is really important at this time, with all of the other extensive things that you and administration are doing.
So let me just tell you, all of those things that I talked about that we're doing, that has a direct effect on those of us that's working and living here, right here in the United States of America.
Yes.
And so when you talk about the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, which we call IPEF, you're talking about a framework that's important because of what you just mentioned. Number one, supply chains.
That's
You
right.
saw from the pandemic, if you don't have a reliable supply chain, it shuts things down. It, it causes things to become more expensive, and the longer the wait there is, it drives prices up. The reason why we had to pass a chips bill recently in the House is so that we can make sure that we have a more friendly supply chain. And China, for example, is not holding us hostage and everything having to go through them. So what we wanted to do, and what is important, it is, since we've had domestically issues with reference to what was known um, um, previously with so-called trade agreements.
That's right.
This is an agreement that's made. It's like a trade agreement that is done through the executive branch that raises workers' standards. Number one, so higher standards for workers. It helps to secure uh, um, fair taxation as well, so that becomes fair, and anti-corruption. Them in there that keeps rates from going up,
That's right.
keeps the supply chains, and it's also greener technology so that we can have sustainable economic practices and help make sure that we're not damaging damaging the climate more than it already has been damaged. And it shows that we are interested in the area. We've got this big thing that that happened when we visited Taiwan and went over to Southeast Asia. China would like to have it to themselves. It shows that we are involved in that area with all of the countries that are in the Indo-Pacific region. And it's some 14 of them now that are part of this agreement, which I think is good, because it also will create some jobs for American and direct investment by some of these countries into the United States. You might have seen, for example, there was a South Korean company that just invested over $25 billion into a company in Texas. Another did so in Michigan. They are coming in and they are creating jobs. In fact, one such investment created 1 million jobs. So this is good for America, it's good for the region, and it keeps us all working together.
Awesome. I mean, all I hear is jobs. All I hear is a sustainable economy. What I hear is trade agreements that work. I mean, this is awesome. And when I look at the four pillars, and you just mentioned them, trade, supply chain, climate change, clean energy, decarbonization, infrastructure, tax, and anti-corruption. What I hear is this is good not only for our country, it's good for the world. And so that's why it's really important to have you on today, Chairman, to talk about some of this, because again, the Coxon Report, we are reporting to all our small business across the country, Southeast Asia, the Caribbean, but more importantly, here in the United States. And we need them to hear how important the work that you're doing in foreign affairs and our country is doing is impacting them every single day, whether they realize it or not. So when I hear $1 billion, and let's add some numbers to it, 25 billion being invested in Texas, and then similar to Michigan, I think that is really good, not just for the country and the areas that we are in, but especially for America. So I want to thank you for all that work you guys are doing to make that happen. Anthony?
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Terry. Let me first start by saying and commend the chairman, the good congressman and chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee, on the work that he's doing. These are perilous times, and as he indicated, our position globally under the previous administration was somewhat of a challenge.
That's right.
And to see now we have under his leadership and the administration, where we now have a stronger NATO, a unified NATO, and we now have an Indo-Pacific region where there's a renewal of our commitment and our ability to help support our allies in the region, and looking at the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework being that particular model that will do that. How would you describe, you recently went to those Asian countries, a number of Asian countries last time, just recently with House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. How would you describe that trip, if you will? And in particular, you did make a high profile visit to Taiwan. And where's Taiwan in the scheme of things in terms of the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, Mr. Chairman?
Well, thank you for that, Brother Weeks. The trip was very successful. I got to tell you that. The reception that we received was incredible. Our partners want us in the region. They want us to lead in the region, and not just leave it to China. They want us to set the standards that we need. And so, when we went there, I went with Speaker Pelosi to meet with our friends and to let them know that U.S. commitment to the region is robust and enduring, because there's always questions sometimes whether the United States is going to stay or be involved in a particular region, whether or not we're using soft power or not, along with whatever the military power that we have, so that folks know that we're there. So as chair of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, I told our allies and partners that America is back on the international stage, because that the prior administration had taken us off that stage, and we're not talking and engaged with our friends and allies in the region, and that Congress will make sure that in the Indo-Pacific, we'll be there to stay. So we needed to deepen our economic engagement, as we talked about, in the region through initiatives like IPEF as a key aspect of the agenda.
That's right.
And then, what was also important during the trip, because just before our trip, the Congress had passed the historic CHIPS and Science Act, which invests in American research and innovation to better position the United States for long-term economic technological competition. And so,
wow, that's what's up. That's good.
Was this kind of a robust investment that demonstrates our resolve. And that is with each and every country that you went. Look, when we went to Taiwan, you mentioned Taiwan, and we just talk about that briefly, over 250,000 people, Taiwanese, just watched our plane land. That's how bad they are.
Wow.
That's huge.
And then when we landed and got off the plane, someone had told them the route. Apparently, the route was lined with people on the street saying, welcome. Thank you for coming.
Wow.
That skyscrapers had signs on welcoming us to Taiwan. The meetings we had with the elected officials and the business people there was tremendous.
Your delegation made history. They made history.
It was very, 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 very good reception, and very, very important, I think, for us to be there, because the Taiwanese Strait and the South China Seas, other than the issues there, it affects all of us, as we've seen with reference to in Ukraine with the Black Sea being barricaded and preventing the food from going through by Russia. It causes food shortages and starvation. So it would be because a lot of ships and other international commerce is done through the South China Sea, as well as the Taiwan Straits. And so we've got to make sure that we are securing and working with our allies in that regards. And so there was good conversation and mutual understandings on how we work together to make sure that happens. So it was a very good trip. And, Taiwan particularly, we wanted to say that the president of China, President Xi, does not tell the United States and members of Congress what to do or where to go or when to go. We do that on our own. We want to make sure that was clear also. But I think it was a very successful trip.
Sorry, Terry, finally, so there are 14 countries now part of the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework.
Yes.
Taiwan is not part of it. That, from my understanding, they're not part of it right now. Do you anticipate Taiwan role in participation in the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework?
Well, that's where it's a little difficult. We anticipate them, working with us, etc. But right now, we are still recommending the status quo, where Taiwan is a democratic ally but they're not, they're not recognized as a country. It's
Right.
it's same thing as, one country, two systems, which we see that China is trying to move away from with reference to what they've done in Hong Kong, and would love to destroy the democracy in Taiwan. But they are very interested and support
it looks like it.
Countries that represent almost 40% of the world's GDP, that they're there because they would benefit also with some of the investments that they can make in some of the companies and that comes out of the various 14 countries.
And I just learned something from you, Congressman. I just realized, and it was just like a light bulb moment. When we talk about the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, while there are countries that are going to participate, it's not, when we say allies just doesn't limit us to countries, but allies in the region. Whoever those allies are to strengthen a U.S.-led Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. Is that what I'm understanding?
That is what you're understanding. Our friends and our allies, so it's not just countries.
Right.
Thank you so much.
That's important.
Go ahead, Terry.
That's important for us to make that distinction here, especially because a lot of those that are listening to us, it's really important for them to understand the dynamics and how it works and how it's impacting them. And Chairman, I know, we had you for a limited period of time, and I don't want to go too much.
Thank you so much.
I do want to thank you so much for being on the show and the Coax and Report today. If there's one nugget that you can leave with our listeners today, what would that be before we let you go?
Especially if we're talking to businesses, don't limit yourself. Don't limit yourself. It's a global economy now. Don't look at opportunities that exist elsewhere in the world, because there's plenty of opportunities there to expand and to grow your businesses, to make a difference. And for me, particularly businesses of color, we want to create opportunities where we're creating wealth. And the way that you create that wealth is in that entrepreneurial spirit that you have. And just let your imagination go, because there's no ceilings on where you can
That's
go.
right. It's limitless. Thank you so much, Chairman, for being
a million thanks. A million thanks.
Looking forward to catching up with you soon. Take care and be blessed.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. Take care.
All right. All right. So, Terry, that was great. Well, always a pleasure speaking to the Congressman, and provide us a wealth of insight on just exactly the work that he's doing, the important work he's doing, and his recent trip to Asia, and those allies that are going to be critical to the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. Absolutely. So thank you so much for allowing. Thank you so much for.
Also helping our small businesses and anyone else that's listening today to understand the impact of the Indo-Pacific region, and how that framework plays itself out, but more importantly, the work that Congress is doing now, the fact that it came by way through the executive, and that they are moving forward. Those jobs, 25 billion jobs, Anthony, that's a lot of jobs. So
it is,
I'm pretty excited about that. About that.
And a lot of the geopolitical atmosphere, right, is so politically charged.
Right.
And you have these polarization of if you will, stakeholders. And it was so important where we understand when we talk about allies, ally is just not restrictive to a country. Allies can come, like we are a territory. We're not a state. The U.S. Virgin Islands is not a state, but we're very much part of the United States, right? We're not considered a state, but we are a territory, and we get all of the same privileges and benefits like other Americans in the United States. And so therefore, I think it's the one major takeaway where people struggle as to how do you describe, what do you call this thing? And as long as we understand that our policy, our geopolitical policy and position has to do with our allies, period, no matter what form or shape they come in within the region.
Right. And I think I want to be clear, too. I said 25 billion jobs. I meant $25 billion that went into jobs. So let's be clear about that number that was given to us. And that investment was both in Texas and in Michigan. And I think it's really important because we're looking at all of the economic impacts that happened after COVID. And we talked about this on the show numerous times about the economy and how it was suffering. And so I think an investment like that into those particular states is really going to impact us all. It's not just going to impact Texas. It's not just going to impact Michigan. It's going to impact the world. And so I think it's really vital for our friends and our allies to come in and to invest into the United States, and for us to show that interest. And that's one of the things that he said, us going to those countries and meeting with our allies is to show that we have an interest also in what's going on there. And I think that that makes a difference in how we work collaboratively together on both sides of our interests. And so I think that's really important. All right, I think we're
okay. So I see your guest is in the studio. Your other guest, waiting patiently. So I'm going to take an exit. We're going to go to break. When you come back, you'll bring your guest on. And thank you so much for allowing me to contribute to your program, Terry, on the Coach Report. And have a wonderful rest of the show.
All right, thank you so much. Take care.
Right.
All right. Bye. Hello. Welcome. Welcome back to the Congressman Report. For those of you that are just joining us, we are part of Our TV Network. We're powered by the Marketplace. Our partners include Tempo. And so you can also catch us on Amazon, Fire TV, Roku. You can catch us on Android. We just had our special guest speaker, Congressman Chairman Gregory Meeks. He's the Chairman of Foreign Affairs. And now my second guest is Teresa Ginger Davis, a lifelong health advocate and education advocate, a spokesperson for sickle cell disease, and a phenomenal sister from another mister that have joined us on the show today. And so, Ginger, I want you to tell us a little bit about the work you're doing both around sickle cell, and then want to talk a little bit about the work you're doing for Untold Stories. On the Congressman Report, I like to definitely talk to our listeners about barriers to business, some best practices and big ideas. We just spoke to the Congressman about the Indo-Pacific framework and how that's impacting our economy in a good way, and some of the trips that he did around Asia. But want to talk to you a little bit more about what you're doing here in the United States, what you're doing in New York more specifically, and what you're doing around sickle cell as an advocate for other nonprofit organizations that are in this realm. I want you to give them a couple ideas about how to grow stronger. And you also specialize in grants, and so we'll definitely talk about some of that as well. So would you tell our listeners who you are and a little bit about what you do?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Terry, for having me on. My name is Teresa Ginger Davis. I am a lifelong advocate, as Terry said, for sickle cell disease. I had a brother, an older brother, who died at 18 months because he was undiagnosed. And my mom was 6 months pregnant with me at the time. You know, as immigrants, not understanding the healthcare system. My mother was not, English was not her first language. And so there were a lot of barriers for her to get help from my brother. And unfortunately, he succumbed to a very treatable complication because he wasn't diagnosed and he didn't get the treatment that he needed. I decided at 8 years old, pretty much, that I wanted to become an advocate in my brother's name, and has been doing it ever since. I am currently the new president of the Sickle Cell Thalassemia Patients Network, located in Crown Heights section of Brooklyn. We are a statewide organization. We have affiliates and chapters in Rochester, Buffalo. We are expanding to Long Island and Albany. We're looking to start a chapter up there, and hopefully in Westchester coming soon. We're also in the U.S. Virgin Islands. I was like, don't, Mr. Meeks, don't run off. I needed to speak with him because we're actually going to be starting a chapter in the U.S. Virgin Islands to represent St. Croix and St. Thomas, the families that are out there. And we're looking forward, along with my program director, Mark Goodwin, to go out there in November for a week to meet with parents, but also to meet with legislative officials, with the deans of the colleges out there, and as well as with the community. So we're really excited about that. And I do want you, before I forget this, when you're talking about, geopolitics and economics, I love those things. And, when we talk about what's happening in the Asian Pacific Rim and thinking that it's nothing to do with us, think again, because we have a lot of young people who are leaving the United States and going to Asia for opportunities. They're in Japan, they're in Korea, they're in China. We started to hear more about these adventurers when the pandemic hit, and particularly in China when they were telling all the folks to get out. In Korea, most Black Americans are from the Caribbean, and people of African descent from Europe who are in Korea are there as teachers. And so when the schools were shut down, they were without employment, without resources, and had to weather the storm, or they had to get out as soon as they possibly could before the airports were shut down to come home, because they had no income and no access. And so we have to recognize that we as a people are everywhere in the world, and also recognize that Asia is everywhere in the world, which means what? It opens up opportunities, because right now they're flooding into Africa. Africa is now the country where a lot of manufacturing and, other resources now are being developed by Asian governments, and we're not in this conversation. We're not in the loop of these things happening. So we need to get with the program, and we need to listen to what Congressman Meeks is saying, what he's doing, and what he's proposing. And yes, we need to open up our businesses and our creativity to seeing where else in the world can we get involved economically.
And that's one
So
of the things that he left us, what he said, that,
yeah.
this is global. There are opportunities all over. There are no limits. It's limitless. And so he did leave us with that final nugget, helping anyone that's listening. And mind you, Ginger, I didn't say this, but we are, you can catch the Coxum report throughout South Asia. You can catch it in the Caribbean and here in the United States. And so all of our listeners have an opportunity to listen to what we talked about earlier about the Indo-Pacific framework, and now what you're doing with Untold Stories, what you're doing around sickle cell, and again, these are offering opportunities to businesses that are nonprofit organizations. One of the things that nonprofits do is that they are able to tap into government funding wherever they are, right? And so one of the things that happened with COVID, and the things that happened with the closing down of our economies pretty much with COVID, is that those opportunities were not as much. But we're coming back strong. And with those obstacles, though, they open up a lot more opportunities. There wasn't, before COVID, I couldn't walk down the street and see so many testing sites. I wasn't able to go online and be able to have a doctor readily available in the way that it was when COVID happened. Telemedicine took off in a total different way. And I know you can speak to that, especially for the individuals that you deal with on a daily basis that are seeking treatment. Opportunities like telemedicine and other opportunities, especially in our third world countries, are extremely important, and they're limitless now. There was a time when they weren't available. And so now, if you have this trusty little device called your little phone, you're able to tap into a lot more resources than you were able to before. You can check your diabetes. You can, check your blood count. You can do so many different things with these devices, but that means that someone else has an opportunity to create an app
yes.
to make it more convenient for you to do something. And that means with the app comes opportunities to grow the app into money. And so that money is then built on growing wealth. And so we're all about building wealth on this show. So I want you to talk a little bit about some of the barriers, because we like to talk about barriers, but we're going to get into best practices and big ideas because I love solutions, right? But what are some of the barriers that you're facing now as the president of a nonprofit organization, as the owner of an additional nonprofit organization, and as a business consultant around for-profit organizations? Because guys, she do a little bit of everything.
A little bit of everything. Yeah. The pandemic actually got us to hone what we were doing. Untold Story actually started to enter the digital media space. We wanted to create a channel that was for us, by us. We hear about that when you look at major network television, cable, or broadcast. The images of black and brown people are stereotypical, particularly of women. And what you see a void of is programming from other countries in their languages. So we wanted to go there. We wanted to go in that space to have programmings that were representative of who we are as a people, not the stereotypes, that we were writing our own narratives. And we also wanted to see programming in different languages because, as we scanned, internationally for content, we were finding some amazing things. And I and some of the members of the company were also community-based producers with public access television. So I was producing shows at Brooklyn Free Speech at Brick, and also Manhattan Neighborhood Network. And with the event of the announcement of the pandemic, the stations closed. And they were closed for more than a year. And the elders who were doing their shows, they were the smart ones. They jumped on there like, well, okay, just because the studio was closed doesn't mean I'm going to stop my production. They actually went straight to Zoom. We didn't do that. What happened with us was, my partner, Tamara Adams, she's like, Alexander, excuse me, Adams Alexander, she's married now. She said, you know what, you need to go back to your wheelhouse, nonprofit and health. And the moment we did that, we sent out proposals to nonprofit organizations that we had relationships with and said, hey, we know things are very uncertain right now, but we can help you stay connected with your community, with all of your stakeholders, and this is how we do it. We got the announcement in maybe the third week of March about the pandemic. By April 2nd, we had SCTPN, the Sickle Cell Thalassemia Patients Network. We had them up and running on Zoom and having their first virtual support interactive on April 2nd. The first Saturday in April, they were already now connecting with their community virtually. And we did the same thing with other organizations that responded.
That's what's up.
So we were able to keep organizations connected with their community. And we also was able to help organizations with their fundraising during that time too, because everybody would think, since businesses are closing down, since people are now being reverted into working from home rather than at the company's office, that it would be difficult. Actually, nonprofits started to get more support. Mm-hmm. And in the first year of the pandemic, we helped one organization raise over $44,000. I think we did a little bit less the following year in 2021, but in 2020, we did pretty good, and we just kind of kept up the process and kind of moved everything to the virtual realm. That's and right. Now that things have opened up again, we have decided to keep the virtual component. So even though, for instance, the Sickle Cell Walk is going to be in Central Park on September 17th in Central Row, we're maintaining a virtual component to that walk. So people who cannot come for whatever reason, they can still participate. There will be engagement activities. They can still do their walk leading up to our kickoff is this Saturday. So mm-hmm. people can, come on virtually for the kickoff, and they can begin doing their 5 miles, their steps for their 5 miles starting Saturday, posting their steps, and also helping the organization to raise funds by, asking their family, friends, co-workers, the business on the corner that they support to make donations towards their team or towards the overall goal of the organization.
And I think I want to pause right there for a minute, because I think it's really important for you to understand what you're doing. So this community that you've created, you've allowed them to understand that they can participate, not in a vacuum anymore, but they can participate in a way that transcends, right? So they're able to go on and they're able to do their steps online, and they're able to send it out to their friends and get these donations for the organization. And this is fundraising. This is fundraising on steroids, so to speak, right?
It is.
You're not paying the overhead of having a venue. You're not paying for food, right? But you're mm-hmm. still engaging your community in a yes. way that's important and that's crucial to get the funding in the door to be able to support and encourage the community that is suffering. And I think it's really important for us to pause there, because you're saying there, by the way, like a nonchalant, like, God, this is what's happening, but this is not happening.
It's not. It is. You know what?
Yeah, this is unique.
It sounds easy because we've been doing this for so long,
right?
And we have solid relationships. For instance, I have to give a shout out to the corporations who supported no matter what during the first 2 years of the pandemic. And this year, I asked them, I said, "Listen, we're going back out, there to do live events, and since we are expanding statewide, I'm going to ask more. We're going big, and I need you to go big with me." And they're like, okay. And I just sent the proposals. And, within the sickle cell community, there are a few companies that everybody across the country is going to, right?
Well, let's pause for a minute, because we got to take a quick break, and we're going to come right back, and we'll talk about those countries. We'll talk about more about the sickle cell community, and then those that are listening, if they're interested in helping, we'll give them some ways to help out as well. So we're going to pause for a minute, Ginger. We'll be right back. Thank you.
Thank you.
the next year I went back, I ended up winning and became like, got the Marvin Sims Award, which is like the best diverse actor. And they called my name, and as I walked to the stage, white kids was throwing books at me. Real talk, right off the top of the balcony, like, because this black boy won.
And then finally, one day I was just cooking in the kitchen, and she was like, "Mommy, so-and-so touched me on my private parts like this," you know? And it was that moment where, like, I had that moment where I told my mom, and my mom was the one that shut me down, and I had a choice, you know, to make.
I shot back, but you can't claim self-defense when you got an illegal firearm and you're 16 years old.
I remember my brother right here, he was selling, he was doing this, but he got a break.
He could have took that money and flipped it. He could have went back, Wake and Wire money, 17th episode. I could flip that.
Even on the out there, I did not. He didn't pop the wire, but I went straight. Right. My bad. I'm going.
I was a single friend for 6.5 years, and I was going through my situationships. Y'all know the situationships, men. Then I found, just like for myself, again, like, oh girl, you still recovering from your childhood. Like, what you about to do with a man right now?
I had an agent, some years after that, tell me that if you don't do nudity, you're not a real actress.
So let they get fired. So let's
should have got fired that way.
Everybody's laughing. They're like, oh my God. They go, okay, great. Are you SAG? I was like, nah, I'm Puerto Rican, I'm black.
Everybody did that.
Like, we can pick up the sides right now and start going. I know this group that I'm with is about that. We're about that. Like, I'm about the work. You know what I mean? Like,
chasing Hollywood industry. Who chasing?
So I saw Chasing Hollywood. I was like, yo, we gonna have to change that name and do something, because niggas don't own chase.
I feel like we're living. That's the term that Hollywood uses.
It's not about just today, me, and blah, blah, blah. What we are doing is being documented. Our grandkids, our great-great-grandkids can see how we all walk, talk, sound, look in our prime. And, something about that is very beautiful. And I think that is another element that kind of attracted me to it, is that it never dies. You never die through this art form.
Welcome back to the Coaxum Report. The Coaxum Report is it's on our TV network. It's powered by Callaloo, and it's also powered by Tempo. And you can also catch us, if you don't catch us today on the Coaxum Report Live, you can catch us on Roku, you can catch us on Amazon Fire and Android. And it is truly, truly a pleasure to have Ginger Davis, a lifelong health and education advocate and spokesperson for sickle cell disease, on the line today. Early on our TV show, we had our Congressman Greg Meeks, who's also the chairman of Foreign Affairs, and he talked about the Indo-Pacific region framework and the 4 pillars that impact all of us across this world, being trade, our supply chain. We were talking about carbonization and anti-corruption, and all of these things that Congress is working closely with our friends, our allies, and our countries on things that impact us and moving forward. And so it was truly a pleasure to share with him this morning. And he told us about $25 billion being invested in Michigan for millions of jobs, and the same thing for Texas and Michigan. So it's really a pleasure to have him on. Now we're talking to Ginger, and she's talking to us a lot about nonprofit organizations and what they had to do to pivot, right? One of the biggest things, Ginger, for me, being in this space, working with small businesses, is hearing the barriers. The top barrier for my small business, and you can relate to this, because as I told my listeners before, Ginger is also a consultant with for-profit business. So she's a specialist in nonprofit business with Untold Story, and with the sickle cell patient network, but she also specializes in assisting with getting grants and, more importantly, working with small business development. One of the top barriers, Ginger, I know you've heard this before, access to capital.
Access to capital, yes.
As the board. And so one of the things you just gave us a good nugget on is how to access capital. You gave us one of your fundraisers that you're doing with sickle cell. You're actually kicking it off online. You're registering steps. You're getting your friends and family to participate and to put money into your efforts, right? And I think that it is really important for those that are listening. When we pivot, we are looking at opportunities that exist, and we're building on them to build our economy stronger, to build our businesses stronger. So talk to us a little bit more about that, Ginger.
Okay, so as now I'm going to put on my hat as the managing director for the managing partner for Untold Story. What we see as consultants, which we focus on organizational development and strategic fund development for nonprofit organizations. What we have seen historically is people who start nonprofit organizations started from the heart. They see a need in the community, something happened in their family, something impacted their child, and first thing they want to do is go start a nonprofit. And that's not a bad thing. But what people in the nonprofit sector don't do that people in the for-profit sector do is vet the market. They don't go look to see, is there already an organization in the community or in my local area that is doing this work? Let me go check them out. Let me see what they're doing. Let me volunteer. Bring my energy, bring my skills, bring my creativity, my passion, to that organization. Everybody wants to start their own thing. And what people, the wrong idea that people have about not-for-profit organization, that it's just, some charity thing that you do. This is a business. You have to register with your state department, right? As an incorporating as a not-for-profit, then you got to go to the Internal Revenue Service, and you have to apply for tax exemptions. There are rules that come with both of those incorporations and registrations, right? That you have to follow. Most people don't even know what these rules are. And when you get your tax exemption, there are a lot of stringent rules that you need to become aware of, like the Sarbanes and Oxley rule, because of what was happening before those laws were put in place, with fundraisers basically taking the majority of the money that was raised. And they would take 70% and give 30% to a nonprofit organization or less, right? And so fundraisers were lining their pockets. You cannot do that now. You cannot commingle your personal business with your nonprofit organization, which I've also seen, right? And so very, very strict laws that you need to understand, and follow, right? Every director, president, vice president, treasurer, secretary are legally liable for the operation of that organization. People don't clearly understand their role. You're just taking these positions, but anything goes wrong, you are personally on the hook for any misappropriations or any misdealings that is happening in your organization. So the first thing we do is teach people about the business of nonprofit organizations and encourage them to run their organization like they're running a business. You don't put your family members or your friends in the position because that's who you could get a hold of. You need to put people in those positions who have the skills that you need for those particular, like your treasurer. They need to be familiar with accounting principles, right? They need to be able to know, because if you're applying for funding. There are, reconciliation reports that you have to do for grants and for sponsorship. You have to follow your balance sheet and your income statement, money going in and out, how it's being spent, right? If you're getting government funding, you have to be able to navigate gov.org and sam.org. You have to set up your profiles. You have to set up your unique identifier IDs. And you need to know how to navigate those systems. If you're applying for discretionary fund from your municipal government, same thing. You have to go into their portals, you have to create a profile, and you need to know now how to navigate those systems. So it's not just as simple as putting somebody in a treasury position and think that they're just going to approve, checks being written out. Is how is that money coming in? How is it being managed? How is the money going out? How is that being managed? And how is it being reported to the funder, right? The executive secretary is like the backbone of your organization. That's the one person who needs to know everything that's going on. They need to be in constant communication with the president and the vice president, correct? And they also need to help navigate what's going on with the other directors. For instance, your director of development or your program directors. They need to make sure that they are doing what they're doing, and then staff and volunteer. So your secretary is a very crucial person. We deal with young people and setting up clubs in schools, and everybody wants to be president and vice president. And then we have to explain to them the importance of the role of the secretary, the role of the treasurer, and the roles of the people who are doing the actual programs. Marketing is so important.
And branding is even more,
You got to tell everybody what you're doing, right? So there are many layers in terms of just the management of an organization, this operational perspective, budgeting. Nobody plans operational budgets. They only plan for their fundraisers every year, right? But they don't have a clear sense of how much money do I actually need to operate this organization beyond just raising money from this particular event. You need to cover your operations. You need to cover your program related funds. If you're traveling to do your work, you need to cover your travel expenses, right?
So clearly, I'm gonna have to get you to come back on the show, because we're getting ready to close out in less than 30 seconds. And I'm like, there's just so many nuggets that you're giving right now. The bottom line is that you have to have your paperwork in order. You have to have your organizational structure in order. You have to know what everybody is doing. The president, the vice president, the treasurer, and the secretary have to all be on one page. You have to understand your fiduciary duty when you decide to be a board member for these organizations, and the list go on. But more importantly, what Ginger has given you is a framework for you to be able to understand how to better run your nonprofit organization, so that you are keeping account of all the monies that are coming in when you're receiving monies and funding, and you're not commingling your funds. You're keeping those paperworks in order, and more importantly, you're reconciling everything you need to reconcile, so that you can go and get another grant later on, another set of funding later on, because you're doing what you said you're going to do. That's a lot in a nutshell. And I know we need to close out right now, but Ginger, it's clear we're going to have to get you back on the show.
I'd be happy to come back
and we organizations about how to do it better. Thank you so much for being on the Coaxum Report. And I look forward to having you come back on and joining us. Take care.
We'll come back and talk about the course that we're going to be doing online to teach people in charitable organizations just how to do it better.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you.
Join us
Enjoy the
next
rest
week
of your
for the